Well, hi, this is Jean. I hope my phone doesn't hang up. That would be really bad. Thank you so much for inviting me. I just enjoyed this group so much. And we're doing the fourth step, part 2. Just to recap for those who are just joining our program. Last time we talked about the spiritual physics of the fourth step and summarized it in the purpose of the basic 6 principles that started the 12 steps was, there were 6 principles to start. One was complete deflation, meaning stop trying to control an addiction you can't control. Second one is reliance and dependence on God. The third one is moral inventory. Fourth one is confession of shortcomings. The fifth one is making amends, restitution to those harmed. And then the fifth one is helping other addicts do 1 through 5. And so we were talking about the basic principles of the steps is how it's all about power. We have this addiction that we're powerless over. No human power can help us. How do we get power from God to do for us what we can't do for ourselves? Now, and I always say this because we're going to talk about God a lot, and I'm going to read out of the 12 and 12, and he talks about God a lot. I just want to be clear, these principles and actions will work whether someone believes in God or not. You don't have to believe in God for this to work any more than you have to understand thermonuclear dynamics to be warmed by the sun. It will work whether you believe in it or not. So if that's any encouragement to anybody. So that is the summary in the first 2. So we're trying to get power, right? And then the reason we do the fourth step is because aspects of self block us off from sufficient power. It doesn't block us off from God. God's always there, but we need more power than the average bear, okay, because we have a spiritual sickness. And aspects of self will block us off from God: resentment, fear, self-will, dishonesty. And we talked about how just writing those down and then reading them to somebody invites power. It's sort of like cleaning the grime off your windows. The sun's always there, but now you can feel it. So we talked about the first 2 columns, who hurt us and who hurt us, what did they do? And then for fear is also, so basically the 60% of the fourth step is tell me who hurt you. Tell me what you're afraid of. Just write it down or read it to me. That's 60% of our fourth step and fifth step. And now we come to the third column and the fourth column. And I think Bill Wilson, I think he realized that people were having a little trouble with their fourth column, the what's my part column. And as you know, a lot of people have trouble with that. And so that's why in the 12 and 12, I think what he did in the 12 and 12 is he sort of tried to expand on all the stuff that turned out to be confusing in the big book. That's just sort of, I hope my phone doesn't hang up when I read this. Okay, so I'm going to read the way there's a lot of ways I hear people do it, but this is how he describes it. And can you still hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. There's 2 kinds of addictions. There's a substance-based addiction and a trauma-based addiction. A substance-based addiction is that person, for reasons that we still don't understand, has an atypical response to that substance. It affects them. They have an effect to it that normal people don't have, and it creates a phenomenon of craving that supersedes anything else. And that could be food, drugs, alcohol. And then there's trauma-based addictions, which are a specific pattern of behavior that grows out of their reaction to another person. That's what makes it kind of tricky, is you're not reacting to a substance. The addiction in and of itself is created as a response to another person's behavior. That's why I had Al-Anon. Lois didn't have any other addictions, but she developed a spiritual sickness based on her reaction to Bill's behavior. And so what with a substance-based addiction, you put down the substance, there may or may not be a completely functioning person under there. In a trauma-based addiction, usually the person under there has been profoundly and characterologically affected by the trauma that they have experienced. So not only do they now have to learn to live without their drug, which is why we have such a bad withdrawal, because first of all, you put down the drug, then, oh my gosh, then there's all that pain and hurt and fear and need that we were using that to protect ourselves from. And then we have all the fact that we don't know how to live. Because the only way we knew how to live is based on something that didn't work. It was based on a sick system that we really don't want to have anymore. So the thing to remember about a trauma-based addiction is when we go to that fourth column, it says, let's get down to causes and conditions. Well, 90% of the time, that fourth column for causes and conditions in a trauma-based addiction, it's not going to be your selfish, greedy, lustful bastard. It's really not going to be that. That's actually almost a little too developmentally advanced for most people in a trauma-based addiction. The thing that's mostly going to be is some kind of desperate survival skill. A survival skill that either people needed to do, think, feel, not do, think, feel something to get their needs met that they needed in that particular environment, or they needed to do, think, feel something or not see, think, feel something, or do something to protect themselves from unbearable pain. So usually what's going to end up in that fourth column is a survival skill that I needed back then but is killing me now. And my experience is those defects of character, God never removed them until I saw, how they saved my life back then. Nobody's going to let go of something that saves their life until they sort of inventory and start to see that they don't need it anymore, and then what it's costing them in the here and now. That's sort of my experience with what ends up in that column. Now, some people are going to say, well, that's not out of the book. I go, yeah, it is. It's exactly how Bill Wilson saw it. Because he didn't see this as being bad or shortcut. He uses words shortcoming, fault, but he tried to come up with all these other words because he realized that people were having problems with it. So this is how he decided to explain it in the 12 and 12, which is exactly what I was talking about, because it's about instincts gone awry. And for people with our addiction, it's to survive, first of all, and then to get any kind of love, connection, protection from pain that became organized in a different way. And if you think I'm making this up, I'm not. It's right out of the book. People go, where do you get this? I go, I read the book. It says, creation gave us instincts for a purpose. Without them, we wouldn't be complete human beings. If men and women didn't exert themselves to be secure in their persons, made no effort to harvest food or construct shelter, there would be no survival. If they didn't reproduce, the earth, aka have sex, the earth wouldn't be populated. If there were no social instinct, if men cared nothing for the society of one another, there would be no society. So these desires for sex relation, for material and emotional security, and for companionship are perfectly necessary and right, and surely God-given. Yet these instincts, so necessary for our existence, often far exceed their proper function. Powerfully, blindly, many times subtly they drive us, dominate us, and insist upon ruling our lives. Our desires for sex, for material and emotional security, and for an important place in society often tyrannize us. When thus out of joint, man's natural desires cause him great trouble, practically all the trouble there is. No human being, however good, is exempt from these troubles. Nearly every serious emotional problem can be seen as a case of misdirected instinct. When this happens, our great natural assets, the instincts, have turned into physical and mental liabilities. Step 4 is our vigorous and painstaking effort to discover what these liabilities in each of us have been and are. We want to find out exactly how, when, and where our natural desires have warped us, and this is my aside, in a trauma-based addiction, have been warped by others. We wish to look squarely at the unhappiness this has caused others and ourselves. By discovering where our emotional deformities are, we can move toward their correction. Without a willing and persistent effort to do this, there can be little sobriety or contentment for us. Without a searching and fearless moral inventory, most of us have found that the faith which really works in daily living is still out of reach. Before tackling the inventory problem in detail, let's have a closer look at what the basic problem is. Simple examples like the following take on a world of meaning when we think about them. Suppose a person places sex desires ahead of everything else. In such a case, this imperious urge can destroy his chance for material and emotional security, as well as his standing in the community. Another may develop such an obsession for financial security that he wants to do nothing but hoard money. Going to the extreme, he can become a miser or even a recluse who denies himself both family and friends. In the inside, we would call that anorexia, right? Nor is the quest for security always expressed in terms of money. How frequently we see a frightened human being determined to depend completely upon a stronger person for guidance and protection. This weak one, failing to meet life's responsibilities with his own resources, never grows up. Disillusionment and helplessness are his lot. In time, all his protectors either flee or die, and he is once more left alone and afraid. Let's see if I can get a... Oh, okay.
Hey, Jane, what page are you... This is out of the 12 and 12, correct?
Yeah, page 42 and 42.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Well, I'm going to stop there because and he goes on. He spends the whole rest of the 4th step talking about it. He starts out, okay, let's look at the basic instinct. Let's look at the need, which is genuine, okay? There's nothing pejorative in that 4th column. It's always starts out with what we were made to be and how somehow that has been distorted. Which we're not going to end up with a list of all the terrible things we are, all the bad things about that. That's clearly not what this is intended to be. This is intended to be how we track down how our basic needs were distorted, usually by our past. What we had to do to survive, either what we had to do to get our needs met or what we had to do to protect ourselves. Now, a lot of people are going to say, well, I don't know how to do that. How do you do that? You know? So, and if Scott said some people wanted to bring their inventories. If you want, I can give you an example on that. But this brings us to the beautiful 3rd column, which for some reason everybody ignores. Because once you realize that this is about identifying your basic human need, without identifying the human need that's going on here, figuring out the 4th column is not going to work out. And if you look at that 3rd column, here it gives us this list of what are our basic human instincts. So I'm angry because so-and-so did this. How did it affect me? Now I'm going to give you the 5 AA ones, and then I'm going to give you 5 other ones in case you want to quote these in a... People don't like AA, collaborative literature. But also it's a synonym, but it's kind of expanded a little bit. So the one is security, financial security, personal and sex relations, self-esteem, ambitions. Those are the 5, and those are all obviously on the 4th step in the AA Big Book. And so people go, well, what do I do now? I go, answer these 5 questions. Before you try to start filling up the 4th column, answer these 5 questions. Well, did it make you unsafe? I think we all relate to being unsafe. Did it make you feel unsafe? Did it make you be unsafe? Did you make somebody else unsafe? And they go, yeah. Okay, well, tell me how it made you unsafe. It gives us a way it connects us with the need immediately. The need for safety is an innate human need. That's the one that's going to translate into helping us understand how that played out in our addiction. Then the second one is money. Did it cost you money? If things cost people money, they're going to care. Because that has to do with security too. Money has to do with security. And that can play out in a lot of different ways, emotional ways. So did it cost you money? Yeah. Was there things you'd rather spend that money on that you had to spend it on because of that? Yeah. What did you feel deprived of because you didn't have money for that? How did it make you feel that you were deprived? How did you suffer because you had to do without that? See how they all start to lead in. The problem is people try to skip from the first 2 columns, disregard the 3rd one, and then they stand there with their little pen over the 1st column, and they're really confused. It's because they didn't spend enough time on the 3rd column. How did this affect me? And then self-esteem. Did it make you feel bad about yourself? Yeah. Okay, how did it make you feel bad about yourself? Did you feel ashamed? Did you feel afraid? Did you feel unbeautiful? Did you feel undesirable? Did you feel like you'd be alone forever? Did you feel like running for cover? How did it make you feel about yourself? See, I wish I could see your faces. Hope somebody's nodding. See how it's expanding, how it bridges that gap between why I'm pissed off and what my part was. And then we come into personal sex relations, obviously. Does this affect my interaction with someone I really care about? Me even having interactions with people I care about? Me having satisfying physical affection? Am I feeling comfortable with having satisfying physical affection? See how now you have also stuff to inventory in the 3rd column. You can start breaking that down there, And then I put, if people don't want to use the word ambitions, I put goals. Are there goals that you had for your life? All those dreams you had that what that person did interfered with. Okay, what were those goals? What were you wanted? Maybe you wanted a position in the community. Maybe you wanted to, not be your mother. Maybe you wanted to not be your father. Maybe you wanted to not have the life they had for you. Maybe you wanted the life they had and you just couldn't get it. What goals and ambitions did you have? And see how now you're connected. You went from being mad at somebody else to seeing how it affected you, to seeing which one of your survival instincts, probably all of them, were affected. Miss Scott, how much time do I have left?
Jane, we've got about 30 more minutes.
Okay. Well, I want to give you some examples of how the common things that people end up putting in that 4th column, how they're, like one of the ways he tries to describe it, and if you read that whole chapter in the 12 and 12 on step 4, he offers many different ways to try to understand these instincts gone awry. The 7 deadly sins that he lists there, that's just one of them. But the truth is none of those are really going to apply for anybody in a trauma-based addiction. The truth is they're just what it's going to look like. The real cause and condition is going to be under that. It's like greed, envy, covetousness, lust, sloth. Well, I'm going to give you some ideas about causes and conditions, or gluttony or whatever, for those behaviors. Like, say it's greed. Maybe somebody grew up with so much insecurity. They grew up in so much chaos. They grew up in so much deprivation that the only way they could organize any kind of permanence, any kind of nurturance, any kind of safety was around money. They're not really greedy. They're just desperately hurt by deprivation and shame, and they need a way to believe there's a way to make themselves safe, and somehow money was the best they had to offer. It's not really about greed. It's about a desperate desire for security. And then let's pick lust, okay? Usually for someone in our addiction, it's not really about that. It's about a desperate need for connection. Maybe the normal ways that connection should have been offered, affection, warmth, hugs, love, maybe those weren't offered to them. The only way they could organize their need for connection or even get any connection was through a sexual fantasy or a sexual connection, because all the others weren't denied to them. It's not really about lust. It's really about the only way that their need for love, affection, validation, and belonging was allowed to be organized. And then let's pick jealousy or covetousness, wanting what other people have. It's not really about covetousness. Maybe it was about you. It was never going to be your turn. All this other good stuff, love, affection, validation, that was for other people, not for you. That sort of continual state of living and wanting what other people have, believing you can never have it, that's not really covetousness. That's just sort of a chronic state of never believing that good things you're entitled to them. See the difference, and see how one is true and the other isn't. See how one feels better. Just calling yourself a bunch of bad names is, if that were all that happened, we just say, okay, we're selfish, lustful, greedy, slothful, gluttonous bastards, and then we'd all go home and be sober. Right? The point of the fourth column is not to call yourself a bad name. The point of the fourth column is to really start to see the truth about which of our instincts were misshapen by a traumatic past. Write those down and admit those to somebody. We don't have to feel bad about it. We don't have to change it. We can't change it. We just have to write it down and read it to somebody. And there'll be a spiritual power in reading and sharing each one of those columns. Saying something out loud that just means you're a bad person has no spiritual redeeming value whatsoever. Saying anything true about yourself, good or bad, has redeeming spiritual value. And then I was talking about pride. Usually also, again, for people with a trauma-based addiction, it's never about pride. It's really about shame. It looks like pride, but it's really not. It's like, say someone, they look proud, they don't want to admit they're wrong. It's not pride. They feel so wrong inside. They can't stand to have one more thing be bad about them. They feel so terrible about themselves, they have to make it somebody else's fault. They feel so bad inside, they have to make everything look good outside. It's really not pride. Chances are it's going to be shame. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that, about what creates shame. Just like Bill Wilson was saying, like I said, if you pick up this book and you read it, it's all about instincts. It's all about instincts. It's all about instincts. That shame occurs when the basic cycle of being alive is disrupted. And maybe this will also help when you go to write down your fourth column. We human beings, you can say God created. If you don't like that, you can just say people are created. They are based on need, met need. Need, met need. I need air, I breathe it in. I have too much carbon dioxide, I think, in my blood, I breathe it out. I'm hungry, I eat, I'm satisfied. I'm tired, I sleep, I'm rested. I'm lonely. I reach out. Someone hugs me. I'm loved. Shame comes when the normal human needs are either used against that person for selfish purposes, are made destructive, are devalued, are used against that person for deprivation by another human being. Instead of, let's say dependence. Say being dependent, being a small person in the home of a large, strong person, and that person decides to use the fact that you are their child and they are big and strong and you're not, to hurt you. Reliance and dependence then no longer becomes a joy. It becomes a state of shame. Say you're hungry and your hunger is used against you to embarrass you, make you feel ashamed, criticize you, deprive you. Being hungry no longer becomes a joy, and being satisfied no longer becomes a joy. Just the state of need becomes a state of shame. Say a child is born. It was supposed to be child born, parents happy, this life exists. Say the parents aren't happy that person is alive. That person then is incapable of feeling the joy of being alive. That's what creates a chronic state of shame, because human beings exist in a chronic state of need. All day, right? All day, every day. And so what happens is, even when the person is gone, just having a need creates a feeling of shame. Just needing anything, needing money, needing a place to live, needing a hug, needing sexual release, needing affection, needing validation, being tired. These just upload this horrible state of shame that we all know what it feels like. I don't really know how to describe it. So that oftentimes when we go to look to understand the underlying shame, it really is helpful to look at where the cycle of need and satisfaction was disrupted. The child cries, the mother picks them up, the mother comforts them. Sorrow, grief, expressing one's needs and feelings, no shame. The child cries, the mother doesn't come, the mother doesn't pick him up, the mother says shut up, the mother abandons them. Need, hunger, sorrow, expressing one's feelings become a state of shame. And sadly, most of the stuff that drives our ideas about attachment and connection to other human beings occurs before we're 1 year old. So you don't have any chance of remembering it, but it will be revealed in the inventory. But it's like we don't have to go back and remember what happened. What we do is inventory how we feel in the present, and God will show us what that did to us. It's not what happened to us, it's what it did to us. And that will always be beautifully and kindly and lovingly revealed by this fourth step inventory. Well, what I want to do now is ask if anybody has any questions about what I said, so I can tell if I forgot to say something. And then if people want to share an inventory, please don't give your name. And then we can use that as an example to see how we go from resentment to helping us see what survival mechanism was involved. Does anybody have any questions?
Jane, I don't have a question per se. That's just a very interesting way to look at. That's a little different shake on the way to look at what's going on and see what's going on as a need versus satisfaction and how that got interrupted. That's really, really interesting. So I get that. So yeah, that's me. I'm sorry. This was Scott from Texas too.
Oh, hey, hey,
That
thanks,
made
Scott.
that comment. Sorry.
Well, I just want to know if I sort of, it's kind of, it's not that complicated of an idea, but if I was unclear, if anybody wanted some clarification, it would probably be helpful to others.
So, real quick, because we've got some new guys in the room, would you just quickly let them know what the story is with 12 and 12, and acquaint them with what you were just talking about?
Oh, sure. Well,
that would be awesome.
Okay, great. Well, this is as far as I understand. Like, they wrote the AA Big Book, which I totally love, and it tells you exactly what to do. But a lot of people don't know it. Bill Wilson had about 3 years sober when he wrote that book. And as anybody knows, who's had any time at all, it's you start to see stuff later on, and that was the best they could come up with at the time. And then they also had developed the 12 traditions, which is how to apply spiritual principles to how we treat one another. The 12 steps are sort of how we get rid of that, aspects of self that block us off from God, so we can get relief from our addictive, obsessive, compulsive patterns of behavior. And that's, the purpose of the steps is to get power for that. Then we have the traditions, which is how do we keep from killing each other? How do we behave in a kind, loving way towards one another? So he wrote a book called The 12 and 12, and he wrote a chapter on each step. And I think what he did was he realized that as time went on, some of these things were more complicated than he had originated. Okay, for example, step 6 through 7 in the AA Big Book is 3 paragraphs. And he wrote a chapter for each in the 12 and 12. And then when he wrote the one on the 4th step in the 12 and 12, he didn't repeat what he'd said. He didn't say, oh, you write this down. He basically, it's almost exclusively about how to understand that 4th column. Because he only wrote like a page or so on it. And I think a lot of people have trouble with that 4th column, right? And he was trying to help people, and he really almost mentioned 50 different ways to understand how our instincts play out into inappropriate survival mechanisms. So that, and I really like it. I think you need the AA Big Book. It was meant to sort of answer all the questions that confuse people in the Big Book. That's my opinion on it. Was that any help?
That was perfect. Yeah, I just think I think we just needed a little bit of. I think we needed a little context for some of us here in the room.
Oh, I see.
Some of us we only have the Blue Book. We only have the Big Book.
Well, hey, I love the Blue Book. It's like I said, but see how this adds a more helpful dimension to the how the heck do we figure out what our part is, which is pretty much what his 4th step was about, is how do we understand our instincts gone awry, which I think is a much easier way to understand it and more useful too. Well, if people don't have questions, some people, it's a lot easier to see when someone actually writes an inventory and reads it. And then you can see how their resentment and their fear, how you can start to see the pattern, and you can move it along, and if they want some help, to see what their 4th column might be. Did someone want to try that, or
I want to try it.
Okay, great.
I wrote something, but
Hey, everybody needs to know your name.
What? But
don't
say
say it.
That's right.
Don't say your name.
That's right. Okay.
Thank you.
You can be more honest if we don't know who you are.
Well, I just wrote down some sentences of things that happened to me when I was a child, and I mean, when you were talking, I was like, it really affected me. See, my heart is pounding right now because it's kind of hard to talk about that.
Would you like maybe an easier way to do it that'll work just as well?
No, I can just say the sentence, what I wrote.
Okay, great. Whatever's good for you.
All right. So the first sentence is, I was never hugged by my dad. Well, not that I remember. Dad never told me he loved me.
No.
Mom, I mean, I know he does, but when you're a kid, you want to hear that. Mom was, and she still is, Mom was overprotective and afraid of everything. Elementary school friends, quote unquote, did not accept me due to my appearance. I was a little chubby at that time, and I grew up in a Latin American culture, and people can be very cruel when you're a kid and you're different. And this one make me kind of hate that individual, but I mean, I haven't seen the guy in like 20 years. Neighbor mocked me because when I was a kid, I liked to move my arms like side by side, like I was flying, kind of like Peter Pan. But he would mock me in front of the other kids in the neighborhood, and he would call me a butterfly. And I hated that with a passion. And I cried once, and I did tell my dad. And that was the first time my dad cussed. I never heard him. He was very upset. He did talk to the neighbor, and after that, the neighbor stopped mocking me. So, I mean, those are the things, some of the things that I wrote. And, like, honestly, I don't know what to make sense of them. It's just things that happen, and I think it affected me today. I mean, as an adult, or as I grew as a teenager.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing that, for your courage for sharing that. And that's where that next column is. That's, like I said, to look at what happened to us and understand that's just the starting place. Okay, so how did that affect your security or how safe you felt?
I did grow up insecure. I did grow up afraid of what people would think about me. And even today, sometimes in terms of finances, I do feel a little bit insecure. Insecure in the way that I look. Afraid of disappointing people, pretty much.
And then what happens when you disappoint people?
I feel bad about it. I don't like it. And I mean, I know you can't please everybody. But, I mean, I don't like it when I disappoint somebody.
Okay. Well, then how does that affect... So now we're going down the list. You're doing a great job. You're doing exactly what's going to... We all start out confused, okay? And it moves towards having God show us what's going on. So how did that affect your personal and sex relationships?
Well,
you don't have to answer.
I started, I mean, when I was 21. that's when I started looking at pornography.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very curious of things, of different types of pornography, and I just was surfing, and I found myself looking at male pornography, and I don't know. I mean, I'm still trying to make sense of it, connecting that to what happened to me in the past.
Okay, well, if you want, and again, I don't know you very well, but I'm just going to, it's so kind of you to use this as an example. A lot of times, an addiction to pornography is, if we understand sex and love addiction at all, it's a pattern. Everybody will choose the safest, most satisfying connection that is available to them. If connecting with actual people is too painful or too fearful, or feel that we won't be received for who we are, and that maybe the rejection of it will be too painful, we will seek some kind of fantasy connection. That usually, do you see how that part of it, your part would be in that, is just that maybe you were so hurt and felt so that the pain of interacting with other people and offering them your true, real, physical, genuine self would be too painful, and that it wouldn't work out anyway. So you sought for the closest connection that you could find. Do you relate to that at all?
Oh, you're asking?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And that,
and I do hate it because I go to church, and I'm married, and I just don't like that about myself.
And then all we can, then we get to say that too. We can't change anything that comes up on an inventory. We don't have to, we're going to feel bad, but we don't have to feel bad about it, and we certainly can't change it. We just have to write it down, and when we start to look for our part, is, in a way, there's something about that connection that feels less scary than connections with other people. And then our part is only that if there's a disruption in our early connections, we're going to look for a connection a fantasy connection where we have more control. That's just the truth, right?
Yeah.
And that may be as much of our part as we can see. I don't want to put words in your mouth. Is there any truth to what I just said?
Yeah.
And so writing down the truth about our motives, that's all that's required of us. Writing down as true as we can be about ourselves, and sharing that with someone who shares our spiritual sickness, that's all that's required of us. Changing that's God's job. Just writing it down. And then you could then wake up again tomorrow and say, okay, why, God, keep writing down your resentments. Keep writing down your fears. And God will start to show you what that's about, and then there'll be power to change that behavior. But I really believe, in any trauma-based addiction, that behavior at some level feels life-sustaining. And until people that's why we need to, working the steps on it, there will be power to change how we feel about that thing. And power to heal the hurt of our past. And power to heal our fears. I don't know, what do you think about that as an approach?
I mean, I do understand it, and I found some relief that what you said, that what it's only that there's so much you can do as a human being, and sometimes I'm too hard on myself. I mean, that's the problem too. Sometimes I'm too hard on myself, and what you said earlier is that do only what we can, as far as you said that that's all that's required from us, and the rest of it, that it's not humanly possible, we leave it up to God.
Yeah.
And to me, sometimes it's hard because sometimes I want answers now, and I know it doesn't work that way. Or whatever, dude.
No, I totally understand. That's why I'm such an inventory fan. Because A, trying to figure out my addiction, I'll fail. Trying to fight my addiction, B, I'll fail. Trying to change myself, I will fail. Picking up a pen and writing down my resentments and reading them to somebody, that's 100% doable.
Yeah.
Picking up a pen and writing down my fears and reading them.
That is doable.
And all the steps are doable. If you feel like you're failing, it's because what you're trying to do is it's not a step. Do I believe it's good to try to stop acting out on our bottom line behavior? Sure, I do. But if we had the power to do that, we wouldn't be here, right?
Yeah.
But we can, like, for our first step inventory, okay, write down all the things that I do that I don't want to do. Okay, write down all the consequences. Write down all the things that it costs me. Read that to somebody. Okay, let's move on to my first step. Write down all my resentments. How did it affect me? What is my part as clear as I can see it right now? Read that to somebody. It doesn't say we're not struck sober the minute we walk into a room. Sobriety is the gift of applying those spiritual principles. And they are 100% doable. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that makes me feel much better.
Yeah. When we feel bad, it's because we're trying to control the uncontrollable. We're trying to do the impossible instead of the possible. And I'll make a promise. How many hours a day do you spend fighting your addiction or dealing with your addiction or the consequences of your addiction?
Well, because I'm at work, I'm very busy. It's like whenever there's a dual moment that I'm not thinking about it, that I'm not thinking about work, that's when I'm wrestling in my head.
About how many minutes a day is that?
Okay. Can go for 15 minutes to hours, because I'm wrestling in my head.
Okay.
Whether to yes or no. But then
yeah, I totally get that.
Do it, so, if I do it, it's gonna affect this, and it's just
it's terrible. I hate fighting cravings. So take that 15 minutes and say, okay, I'll fight after. I'm gonna pick up my pen. I'm going to write down 3 resentments. I'm going to write down 3 fears. I'm going to pick up the phone. I'm going to call my sponsor, call my trudging buddy. And I'm going to, instead of fighting for 15 minutes, I'm going to write an inventory and admit for 15 minutes.
Okay.
If you trade the time that you used to spend fighting, if you just take even half the time you used to spend fighting on, writing your first step, reading that to somebody, listening to somebody else read you their inventory, saying, hang out after the meeting, say, are there any newcomers? I need some help. Calling back a newcomer. That we don't spend our life fighting our addiction. As we take the action of those principles, God will give us relief. it actually is much less time consuming, and it makes you feel a whole lot better because instead of fighting your addiction, you're just making the effort to practice the steps. What do you think about that?
I like that very much. That makes more sense.
Yeah, I like it too. I hate fighting cravings. I hate having cravings. I hate things that are set up to fail. I really hate that. So let me know how that goes. I know I don't know your name, but let me know how that goes.
Okay.
Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, Jane, we've come to the end of our time here.
Thank you so much. That's
Thank you.
really helpful.
I'm going to stop the recording now.
Okay.